I lived and worked in Denmark for 8 years with my family before finally moving to France. And in this video, I will list some of the pros and cons of living in Denmark. The first really great thing about living in Denmark is that it's very good for young families. So if you're starting a family, it's a great place to do so. It's also very cheap to get the kids involved in extracurricular activities. When our kids were young, they often did gymnastics, badminton, ballet, and also music lessons. For our daughter, it was piano. And in Denmark, everything is heavily subsidized, so it's quite cheap and affordable for your kids to get involved. Another great aspect is the education system. It's very focused on the outdoors, so the kids will play outdoors a lot of the time in all weathers. So even in the winter, they'll be out in their big snowsuits. So even if it's raining or snowing, muddy, the kids will be outside all the time. So they'll come home covered in mud, covered in sand. We were constantly having to clean up sand because they were playing outdoors all of the time. There are also a lot of outdoor places for the kids to explore, a lot of parks. You're never too far away from a park. There's always somewhere you can walk to. Where we lived, close by, we had a great park. We also had an animal park, or called a deer park. And we used to spend a lot of time there. You could take carrots and apples, feed the deer. They're very, very friendly. Although you weren't supposed to feed them by hand, but most people did. The other great thing about having a family, a young family in Denmark, is the whole process of having a child. This was by far one of the best experiences that I had. Our daughter was born in the UK, but our two sons were both born in Denmark as home births in our house, actually by the same midwife. The level of care that you get right up until the pregnancy, during the pregnancy itself, and then in the months after was just fantastic. Compared to our experience in the UK, it really was premium. Top notch. So for me, the midwives in Denmark and the whole system and the whole process around having a child is absolutely fantastic. The midwives were very, very experienced, very, very patient. I was quite surprised we actually chose a home birth, but the main reason was that our daughter was quite young at the time and we had no family in Denmark, being expats living there. Just in case our son was born during the evening, we would be able to leave her in her bed, which is actually exactly what happened. The midwife that we personally had, who delivered both of our sons, was just fantastic. I remember when our first son was born, she actually had the umbilical cord and she was asking me, "Sean, take a photo. This is one of the most perfect umbilical cords I've ever seen." She was describing the whole process. Very, very informative. So in terms of bringing up a young family and having lots to do, Denmark is a fantastic place to be. The second great thing about Denmark is the efficiency and the convenience. Now, whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, everything is connected through your social security number. So whether it's your bank, your utility bills, your insurance, telephone contract, it really doesn't matter what it is. Everything is so simple to set up because everything is connected through the social security number, or in Denmark it's called a MitID. So if you do want to change providers or change banks, everything is just made so simple because of this process. There's no heavy paperwork, there's no bureaucracy, there's no signing of lots and lots of documents. But I would say one aspect of that is that the country and the people are very much focused on this idea of trust. Not just trust in each other, but trust in the system. So I think this is partly why this works so well. For example, before we moved to France, one of the most stressful times was selling our house. Of course, we found an agent to deal with this for us, but once he had found a buyer and we were ready to sell the house, everything was connected with the bank between us and the buyer and the agent. So essentially I did nothing. The money was just all transferred and all handled in a very efficient way, and you could see it online. Very, very transparent. It just made the whole thing so much simpler. Or the one and only time I changed my phone contract in Denmark, which was as simple as calling up the new company, asking them for a new contract, and that was it. As long as they had my social security number, everything was done automatically, and the SIM cards were in the post on the same day. So easy. You didn't need to contact the other company. Everything is just cancelled automatically. The third great thing about Denmark is the transport system. The buses work very well, the trains work very well, but particularly the accessibility for bikes. Where we lived, most roads had access for bikes, and it's not just these little cycle paths that you see in some cities. They're quite wide, so you never feel unsafe on them. There's plenty of space for the cars to pass. There's plenty of space on the cycle path for both runners, other cyclists, so it's very, very convenient. When I arrived in Denmark, I didn't have a bike. I was driving to work every day, and I was probably about 10 kilograms heavier than I am now. But after a while, and certainly for the last 2 years of living in Denmark, I was cycling every day to work in all weathers. So even during this winter when it's pouring with rain and it's sideways and you're almost getting blown off your bike, or it's snowing and it's icy, I was still cycling. Like most people, I had the full waterproofs. So when I did arrive at work, I could take them all off and I was ready to go. But I suppose it's very good this way. You save a lot of money. We didn't need to get 2 cars this way. And it's also good for my health. A 15-minute cycle, both in the morning and in the afternoon. So 30 minutes of activity every day is really good. Another great thing about Denmark were the local activities and the sense of community, particularly those organised by the communes or by the councils. This always gave me the sense that they were spending all of our tax money on something very useful. But you would see during Christmas the amount of money they spent in the town centre on all the decorations and the lights and the activities. You would also see during the summer when they had local concerts or displays or exhibitions, and these would be quite regular. And this would get everybody out into the town centre during the weekends or in the evenings on the weekdays, and it really felt like everybody was together. During Easter there would be lots of activities. Even during the autumn there would be activities, not just for things like Halloween, but also these fantasy festivals which they would set up. And these festivals didn't just take over a small area, they would take over the whole town. For example, the Fantasy Festival, I think, was always in September. You would have activities all over the town and it would be incredibly busy, flooded with people, lots to see and do, lots of people dressed up as these strange creatures. What was really nice is that the local authorities really supported this. One of the final pros of living in Denmark is that it's very safe and very clean. Now, maybe this can't be said for all places in Denmark. I've been to Copenhagen. It's maybe not quite like that everywhere, but certainly where we lived in Esbjerg, it was very clean. And from my perspective, also very, very safe. We never encountered any instances where we felt unsafe. Although the one thing that is lacking is police presence. And maybe because it's relatively safe, there's no reason for the police to be out patrolling all the time. But to see a police officer in Esbjerg was an unlikely and very rare occurrence. The only thing that we did have were burglaries. Not to ourselves, but in our area, which was a relatively nice area. We knew people who had been burgled, one of our close neighbours, and an adjacent street as well. And over the years of living there, we have heard many stories of people being burgled. But apart from that, it was very safe. Now we come to the cons, because contrary to what everybody believes, maybe Denmark is not the happiest place in the world. I will get the biggest one over with first. For me, absolutely, by far, the worst part about Denmark is the tax. Now, I know you're going to say, but Sean, you said it's very clean and very safe, and that's where all the tax money is spent, and it's great for young families, and you have all of these activities, and a lot of money is being reinvested. True. But if you want to invest your own money, this is where I have the issue, is the capital gains tax. Is the unrealised tax, because a lot of the money is not spent wisely. A lot of the money is spent very unwisely. I won't say any more as to where the money is spent, but it's certainly not spent very wisely everywhere. And to tax private citizen their own investments that they have taken all of the risk in is not particularly moral nor just. And so you will have people invest their money elsewhere, because just to do it in Denmark is too risky. You take all of the risk and they take half of the gain. If you're working also in Denmark, the top rate of tax is very high. You can be easily over 50%. And for us, where it's only myself that works and my wife is at home, it's not very practical. I had some people ask me in the past, your wife doesn't work, how can you afford to live? I think families should be able to exist and should be able to survive on one salary, and one of the parents can focus on what's going on at home. If the tax is so high that you can't afford to have only one parent working, you're essentially pushing both parents out into the workplace, and then what do you do with the kids? You're forced to put them into childcare, and sometimes from a very young age. One of the cons of living in Denmark is that you do pay, I would say, an unjust amount of tax. The second con, and probably most people will be very surprised about this one, is the health system. I've been lucky enough to have lived in a few places of the world. Denmark, like my home in the UK, are often exemplified for their great healthcare systems. Apart from what I've already mentioned around the topic of having a child, which was absolutely fantastic, probably one of the best places you could possibly be to have children. My primary issue was with the local GPs. I felt all the time when you were with a GP that you were simply just a number, that they wouldn't sit you down, go through what was wrong with you, question you, try to get to the root of the problem. They would try to get you in, give you some medication and get you out. Many occurrences, not just myself, but other anecdotal evidence from people I know, also from my wife, you would be prescribed wrongly and you would have to go back again and they would try and prescribe something different and then go back again and try something else without really taking the time to get to the root of the problem. For example, I was having issues with my throat at some point. I have been asthmatic all of my life and the inhaler that I take wasn't working. So I went to see the doctor and she prescribed me with medicine for acid reflux, which I told her that this can't possibly be the root of what's going on here. You know, I'm really struggling to breathe. My inhaler is not working. She said, no, I think it's acid reflux. Maybe when you're sleeping. I said, no, it can't be. It's just not. But okay, I'll trust you, and I take the meds and I go and pay for it. And that's the other thing in Denmark. There are methods where you can get cheaper medication, but you do need to pay for your medication. It's not completely free. Like, for example, where I'm from in Scotland, it's been free for some time. But after a couple of days of taking this, I said to her, this is not it. It's not acid reflux. So I went back and she gave me a different kind of inhaler, which I told her I've taken before, and it's not really for this. But again, I went and I paid 300 krona and I took it for a few days. I told her again, this is not working, until eventually I was able to get her to send me to the ear, nose and throat doctor, and we discovered the root of the problem very quickly. So right from the onset, that's probably what should have been done, instead of just simply prescribing medication until it goes away. The other issue I had was with the emergency system. Not serious emergencies where you need to call the ambulance, but minor emergencies. For example, our daughter, when she was younger, she pulled some soup down off of the kitchen table, which was still very, very hot. We did what we were supposed to do at the time, but eventually we had to go to the hospital to have it checked. And when we got there, it took a very, very long time to get seen. If you are in Denmark, to be seen in these minor occurrences, you need to call ahead. But of course, sometimes you don't know if it's serious or not. And so you don't call ahead because you want to get treatment, or you want to get your kids seen to, or yourself seen to as soon as possible. And so you just go there directly. But if you do that like we did, you end up sitting in the waiting room for 2 or 3 hours. Getting minor tests as well, for example, a urine infection, takes forever. And the results take a very long time to come. When we were in China, for example, if you need things like that tested, it's not expensive. You go to the hospital immediately and you get it seen to within 20 minutes. It's so much easier. The other thing is that in Denmark, there's not a lot of options if you want to go outside of the public system. If you want to see a specialist, or you want to see a private specialist, a private doctor, it's very, very difficult because they're not very easy to find. It will be a surprise to a lot of people, but I knew many colleagues and friends from different countries, whether it's China or Brazil or the UK, who actually left Denmark to get their medical treatment. The next bad thing about living in Denmark is the weather, which I think is quite an obvious one. It's cold, it's damp, it's dark, it's very, very windy, probably because it's so flat, and it rains all the time. And it's all a bit miserable. And you very rarely get days like this in the south of France, which are absolutely beautiful. The other thing, and maybe this is not a con or a bad point about living in Denmark, but for me, coming from Scotland and having been to many other places, the scenery is a bit bland. And I think that's mostly, at least from my point of view, because it's so flat. I think the highest point in Denmark is only 250 meters or something like that. So when you are driving around, there's not much to actually look at. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some very beautiful places, some really nice forests. They have some really nice beaches, although you can't be on them very often because it's always so cold and windy. So the last point I wanted to make about Denmark was the food. Again, like the scenery, I think it's a bit bland. They like a lot of potatoes, pork, flæskesteg, which, don't get me wrong, is very good. Leverpostej, which is absolutely fantastic. Probably one of the things that I miss most about Danish food is leverpostej, maybe only leverpostej, and rundstykker. But apart from that, although they do have other things, I would say when you're comparing it to other cuisines, it's not particularly exciting. So after 8 years of living in Denmark, I would say these are probably the top 5 pros and top 5 cons that I can think of. Of course, there's lots of other things, but these are the ones that came to mind offhand. We lived there for a long time. I don't regret any of it. It was a fantastic place. We loved being there. We made lots of good friends. We hope to return at some point. But like everywhere, there are good things and bad things. But if you live in Denmark, or you have lived in Denmark, feel free to share in the comments what you think about the country. And if you agree or disagree with some of the things I've said, maybe you see it from a different angle.